Hey guys, it's Mike Wise back again, and it's been some time since we've spoken about Universal Platform. And I thought it was time that we walk through some existing features focused on extraction, translation, and load. More specifically, talk about a living MDM and being able to bring together disparate information systems in one platform. Universal Platform itself is a single information management platform, and it attempts to bring together a number of capabilities found within inside IT organizations today, but present that as a singular application available via the web. So for today, I've got an instance that's running on my virtual machine, and what we're going to do is essentially target numerous data sources, ranging from databases, spreadsheets, Microsoft Access, and bring that into a single data hub running on Oracle database. So I'll flip across here into my Windows virtual machine and essentially start up the Universal Platform using its manager. Universal Platform Manager is the way to be able to start and stop and manage platform instances. It can run on a server, a desktop, and it also runs in the cloud for us. And you can press the start here, and that essentially starts up the platform itself, and we can see it starting up. I can kill that off, and it then minimizes to the tray for my own personal use, so that I can carry out all of my integration activity. I see that it's now running, and I'm able to bring up my browser. Here I'm presented with the login screen for Universal Platform. It's key to remember that Universal Platform security, its onion skin, its role-based access is built from the ground up. Everything that is done with inside the platform is done with a perspective or mindset for security first. Being able to share and provision information with inside an organization is key and very important. So I'll log in as administrator here, and then get going. So what I'm presented here is the console and all of the options available to the administrator user himself. And essentially I can flick over to the console just to take a quick peek and see that everything is normal and running on the platform itself. I can see that numerous services are stopped at this point, and there's not very much activity going on the machine itself. So in order for us to carry out an integration demo, what I've decided to do is target Oracle database as a data hub, and then leverage the capabilities of the platform to load from different data sources into that data hub. So to work through this example, I've got an Oracle database sitting here and running, and I've got Oracle SQL Developer, and as you can see I've got a connection to a database that targets a table called customer. And customer is going to be the place where we're going to store all of this information found from the organization into this location. So as you see, there's currently nothing there. I've also got some files, just two sets of files here, a spreadsheet and a CSV. The CSV contains various contact information that I may need, and so I can use that as a part of the solution to integrate information from. It's quite common to have files everywhere in an organization. It's also very common to have Microsoft Access inside an organization. So I've got a number of contacts here. I've got myself and Mike Shepherd, our channel manager, defined inside this database itself. Furthermore, I've got SQL Server. It has a database called Customer Hub with a table called Customer and a number of records living inside of that table. And then lastly I've got MySQL. So MySQL here has got a table called Contact. And the idea is that this particular field entry here, the column called Title, is of interest to us from MySQL. And for this demo's purpose, what we're saying is that MySQL, however it's presented as a contact piece of information, is the king, is the number one owner of Title and manages Title throughout. So for all of our contacts and connections and however we decide to understand people that we engage with in the organization, for some reason MySQL here has decided to be the king of that with regards to just Title. So what we need to do with inside Universal Platform is decide how we're going to approach the integration solution. The first things first though, what we need to do is build what's called a living master data model. It's living because the platform's constantly running, and it's also malleable from different users. So from the ground up, within the design of the platform, we look at the topology, so the design of the organization, and we also look at the security and the users who are manipulating information within inside that set of organization. So what we need to do is essentially decide on how to feed the information in, or where the information lives within the organization. To that, we call that a single point of truth, or SPOT for short. A SPOT, and here we have a list of SPOTs that have pre-created, identify a unique emitter of data, or a source of data, and so that we can essentially tag and track this information that moves within the system and be processed by the living MDM. So I've gone ahead and created some entries here. I've got a customer access, a customer for CSV, a customer for Excel, and SQL Server. I've also identified that there is a data hub, and I've just tagged it with a name of Oracle. What I need to do now is actually introduce my information about MySQL. So over here on MySQL, I know it's actually called a contact. So I'm trying to get the language right. So I just say contact, MySQL. I just locate this record into a division and zone for the purpose of being able to classify where in the organization this sits. We've just got some generic ones created here based on the platform pre-defaults. The next step then, essentially after identifying that we've got a number of unique sources, is to then start modeling out what that data is going to look like. So what I've done here in advance is basically created some models, and so if we go and look at the Oracle Data Hub itself, we've got a model that's been pre-created. It's only got one single record here, and essentially it contains all of the attributes that were defined. So these attributes here, customer number, first name, last name, phone number, email, title, and title GUID. So if we go and look at our SQL developer, we see that these columns are pretty much the same because we've sourced these. What we can do in the platform is use some of our extension capability and be able to generate database schemas indirectly to be able to initiate data models and start them off. What I'm going to do throughout this demo is just enhance this model to be able to talk about the various data sources and constraints that I need in order to be able to load data into this data model itself. So the data model, more or less, is a conceptual idea. It is not the actual database itself. It's actually a captured version of whatever that database schema structure needs to be. The idea is that many people can manipulate and edit that model over time in order to cope with change, in order to cope with new concepts coming on in. So what I've done is pre-created some models. I've got one here from SQL Server. To do that, I can simply just generate. So I press the generate from database schema. I select a database connection, and then I can press get schema and then load the schema in straight away and then start editing it. And then essentially what I do is set the source, that is the single point of truth, for who is related to that model itself. So we'll go back here to Oracle and we can see that the model is actually related to the data hub. I went ahead and pre-created that. Same for the Microsoft Access. We've pre-created all of their attributes and we generated that in from a standing start. So here it is for CSV. So I've set up a CSV model. And what I'm doing with these models is really bringing in a place where I can identify, here is the data coming in to our organization's data hub. Here is the organization's data hub in order to compare that data with and translate with. And so we need to be able to model everything, every piece of data that's moving through the system such that we can understand it at a later date. So I'll go ahead and bring in some CSV. I see that I've got nothing here at the moment. So in order to bring CSVs into the system, what we have inside Platform is the ability to create storage. So I've got some local files here, so I've got those contact and my contacts here, XLS. What I will do is just create some storage so that I can bring their definitions in. So we've got a number of forms of storage. Universal storage is internal database storage that we can allocate. And I'll just call this customer files. Now with everything that we put into the Universal platform, it all comes with security. Currently this object, which is the customer files storage, is owned by administrator, and only administrator can see it. He hasn't yet decided to share to a group and used elsewhere. I can press the Explore button here, and this basically provides me with a very familiar file exploration interface. And what I can do is just simply, if I'm in SaaS or on platform, doesn't matter where I am, on the internet for example, I can just simply drag and drop those files straight into the platform. Very handy. From here I can now return to my data model and CSV model. And because I don't like typing as much, I can select the storage now, which is customer files, and then I can choose the root and the pattern of startup style, so I'll just say CSV, and then I can press Get Schema. What it does is then analyzes the CSV for me and shows me all of the fields that I actually need to bring on in, so I can then just tag all of those. This is a very quick, effective way of kicking off a master data model itself, and you can do that many times over. Likewise, I could have just pressed Add Entity here and then start the process from that point forwards. What I need to do with this, I know it's contacts, but I need to go and set the source from wherever it came from, so this was from CSV. So at least we know that that was sourced from CSV. And then press Save. Also to note is that we keep track of any change that's occurring against the model, including the generation of the attributes and the types of attributes that come on into a data model itself. So I can press Save and Close at that point. Next that's missing from this models is that I need to create a model for spreadsheets, and so what I'll do is just add a new model and do this manually. So this will be a contact for Excel. The spot is Excel, and then I can go and create the model manually, so I can just press Add Attribute, and what I will do is go and have a look at the Excel spreadsheet itself and decide how to bring it in. So I'm really only interested in the first name, the last name, the email address, and the job title. So what I'll do is call this contact as the name of the entity. I'll give it a title, contact. Its source is Excel, and it's a type of table. From here I can then just quickly create the attributes, so it's last name, it's then first name, I then need email address, and then job title. The advantage here is that if there's change, we experience change of any type, what we can do is delete or add and migrate any of these fields to and from. They're basically just here as a reference to say, well, this column equals this column. And when you see it, you bring it in, make sure that that column's around. If that column isn't around, then do something about it. The advantage here with the platform is that this is all web-driven. It's all SaaS-based. It can be hosted anywhere and pretty much allow anyone with the skill set to understand how to map these things to do it themselves and manage it themselves. And so you don't need developers to tell you how to map data. So here I go and set every field inside of here to make sure that I tag at the attribute field level that is coming from a source of Excel. I'm not too worried about any other thing for this. It's just simply telling me that I know how these fields are going to come together and how they read. So I've just made it such that it gives it maximum capability for reading. So what I've done is gone through and assigned all of the spots. I've pretty much got all of my data models. I've got a CSV model, an Excel model, an Access model, a SQL Server model, and an Oracle model. So the one that I'm now missing is my contact for MySQL. So I'll bring in contact from MySQL. And this time around I'll just use the database generation, and then I'll target MySQL. Oh, MySQL's not there. Okay, that's no problem. So what I'll do is go off and define a database connection. So I do this by going to Interface Manager and Databases. Universal Platform out of the box supports quite a number of databases by default. What these are extensions, they're plugins to the platform that understand how to connect to a specific database and talk that database's language. So what I need to do is create a MySQL database. So this will be a contact MySQL. And I'm going to cheat in advance. I've already got the connection string in order to be able to do this. And here's my MySQL connection string. It's going to connect to a remote database server and then start talking to it with a username and password. I can define additional credentials at this point and then apply separate credentials from the database connection and have that managed in session. I can then jump into the connection builder, which allows us to be able to understand how and what connection details I do need when I run it. And lastly, I can test that database connection. So that means that I can connect to that MySQL database comfortably with all of those details. So contact MySQL is now there. So we can return back to Data Manager, Models, and then we can jump straight into the contact MySQL and just simply generate our schema from the MySQL contact database. So I can just press Get Schema. It goes off and connects to the database. I see that there is a single table in there with all of the fields defined as part of the model. And away I go. And the first things first is I go through and set the entity, and I'm good to go. So I just make sure that all the attributes are in order and they've been imported correctly, which is the case. And away we go. And I see that there's actually a primary key sitting on that table as well. Save and close. So what I've now done is gone ahead and actually created all of what I need internally to understand how to model a contact, a set of contacts across different or disparate systems, but of different shapes and sizes. And essentially my understanding is that I really just want to bring all of that information and set it into my Oracle database called customer and the table customer. So the next thing as part of this is that I'll need to go and create some connectors in order to be able to talk to each of these data models themselves. And so essentially I need to be able to source this information and then bring it together in some way. So to do that we can create some queries. So I've pre-created some queries here. Here's one for Access and SQL Server and the customer data inside of the Oracle database. So if we look at the Oracle database and go into our customer, it's just essentially select star from customer, which essentially should produce us no information whatsoever since there's nothing there. So if I just press run and run a standard SQL query on that database, it should just essentially produce nothing. So no errors returned from that. Likewise, if I go across to SQL Server then and run a SQL Server connection on the SQL Server database, I see that the SQL Server data is returned. So just to prove that is the case, I can go to here in Toad and SQL Server and I can see that information has returned. Same. Likewise for Access, I can connect to Access, click on the editor here and press run, and there's all the information coming back from Microsoft Access. So that information is essentially this information here. What I then need to do is be able to target MySQL because it's a part of bringing the data together. So I'll just add a contact query for MySQL, set it to a zone, press save, set my default database to MySQL so at least our SQL tool understands us. And then contact for MySQL, and it's select star and contact. And I understand that the table is called contact. So I should see there's two records returned. Indeed, two records returned. The reason why we store SQL queries is that SQL queries are an asset to an organization. Many times within an organization, a user will be writing many SQL statements against different types of databases in order to produce some kind of valued information. We believe inside the platform that this is should be managed, and a process which should have some control over it, as they're part of the information assets to an organization. This actual IP that's generated by the end user to understands how to look at data within inside an organization. So what we try to do with this platform is allow that management to occur. So I've created some single points of truth, some data models to understand how to bring the data in, and some queries as a part of my living master data management system. What I then now need to do is essentially create what's called data formats. Data formats essentially connect two models together. What I've done is I've gone and created a model for importing data, and I've gone and created a model for the end result. What is it I actually want it to look like? Now, for each of these systems, I have to create a data format for them. So I'll do one for CSV to Data Hub. So I want contact CSV as the source, and then I basically want to say Data Hub. Press save. At this point, I can go in and then be able to join this information together in a very simple and graphical way. So these are all the contacts that are coming back inside my CSV, and this is the information I actually need inside my Data Hub. So essentially I need email, first name and last name and title if you got it. Company, first name. Then I need last name. So see if they've got a phone number, if they've got it. Business phone. And then title. So I understand that in the CSV it's got job title as title. Lastly, email address. I don't need to bring in customer number at this point because that's managed and owned by Oracle itself. So then at this point that is mapped. So my CSV to Data Hub is mapped. So I can press save. If there's any change to either data model, either through name or position, we can manage this just by simply moving around the drag and drop within this one interface. So what I'll do now is move on and create every data format we require. So I've got Excel to Oracle format, contact and contact. We can also achieve some interesting behaviors whilst we're mapping. So I can drag email to email, first name to first name, last name to last name. But if I want, I can actually to lower, to upper or regular expression and validate information as I'm moving through this. So say for example, if I wanted to upper the job title, too easy. I can just simply bring the to upper in and then provide that manipulation as we go. Again, these are all delivered through our extensions. Using Universal Platform's SDK, you can then add to these custom extensions. One extension may indeed be taking an address field and turning it into a latitude and longitude. So I'll just map that, save and close. So then I'll do access to Data Hub. Remembering to set my source spot. Access to Data Hub. Zone. And save. Just have to make sure that my spots are set for each of the source items. It's important that when we're bringing the data that we identify the source system it's being brought from, so we can tag the information that appropriately. So for Excel, we need it for Excel. A couple more to go. SQL Server to Data Hub. And we've got SQL Server, Universal Platform, SQL Server to Data Hub. Save. Again, bring in the source, target, and we map away. Email, first name, last name. Note, we're just mapping the fields that we've got. Last one, MySQL to Data Hub. Too quickly. MySQL to Data Hub. We go through to MySQL, and then we have Oracle Data Hub. We identify that that was sourced from MySQL, and then we set the zone. We press Save. We can then apply formats and select what we need. So we're interested in bringing across email, first name, last name, and most importantly, title. Save and close. So what we've done is put together a number of data formats. As a part of the extract, translation, and load process, the data format allows us to align an incoming source to an outgoing target and be able to change and manipulate that information on the way through. Traditionally, other systems and vendors use XSL and XSLT and XML and all sorts of various formats to achieve this. But with inside Universal Platform, since we've got a repository, we can utilize a drag and drop system to simply identify what we need. So let's check we've got everything. We've got Access, CSV, Excel, MySQL, and SQL Server. So the next is to be able to talk to a database and each database in turn. To do that, we use our connector system. We have connectors for each database that we need to talk to. And we also need connectors in order to talk to file formats. So I'll go ahead and create a document connector. So in the document connector, essentially we've got methods that allows us to read and write key formats that we find in the internet world and commonplace inside organizations, ranging from vCards, iCals, XML, Word documents, spreadsheets. So in this case I need spreadsheet and I need delimited. And then essentially I can then just save and close. What that's done is created an instance of a connector with some specific features that I'm going to use as a part of a workflow in order to coordinate the loading of the data format so that it can in turn transform and load that information into my data hub. What I've done in advance though is created extensions for specific databases. So I've got a database connection to Access. So specifically it requires a database access connection and perhaps an overriding user credential. With inside of there I've got some methods for getting and accessing and working with databases. Specifically we've got get table data from query. Since we've written queries to be able to manage and manipulate the data or get the data, we can utilize that particular connector verb. From here we can then create a new database which is going to target MySQL. So I can press save. And then we can set the spot, so this is MySQL, it's zone as Universal Platform, and then set the database connection to MySQL, which I pre-created before, and press save. Likewise, the methods need only set one, which is for get table data from query, and then save. The difference here is that for the data hub, when I set up the connector for the data hub, is that I specifically need to include not just get table from query, but also include what's called the save method. So in order to be able to save information to a database, we have a save verb, and that we can use that inside of our pipelining technology, our workflow. So I'll just press save and close. Now, in order to complete this solution, what we need to do as a part of this scenario is provide an endpoint, a web service, to a customer of ours who wants to see this Oracle table data information. So currently we see there's just nothing inside of that system itself. So in order to achieve that, we've got a database connection, but we also need to create an endpoint in order for us to expose that information out. So for us to endpoint, we need to create a workflow in order to be able to pull that information from the Oracle table. In order to create a workflow, we need to run and create pipelines. Pipelines are our way of automating various activities inside the universal platform. So I can just simply press add here, and I'll just call it get, and keep the names the same, so it's get customer, and then press save. I can then switch over to the editor, which simply loads up our editing tools, this left-hand palette with all of the verbs that I've pre-created, and then essentially I can drag them onto this context area here in order to be able to execute them. Specifically, I want Oracle, so there's get table data from query. I can just drag that across into our context area, and then the parameters for running get table data from query is that I need to supply the query. And so I can see there's Oracle Data Hub customer. So I can simply select that and just press run to see the result immediately. Inside of this pipeline editing system, it's really all about flow programming and automation. Everything that we try to do in here is be able to automate every aspect of the platform access and interaction. So this is the start, then I move to get table data from query, and then I move to the end. So do this thing, and then do this thing is what this workflow is instructing it to do. This particular item that I'm selecting now is called a node. And so these lines don't actually symbolize movement of data, it just symbolizes the progress of the flow. Now that we've run it, we see that it's actually executed on my local machine and only took 38 hundredths of a second to run. And then if we look at the log, we see that various debug information comes back to indicate that it did run. Most importantly though, this node deposited information into the context of the pipeline, information about executing get table data from query. And specifically, since there's no data returned. So what I can do here is just save and close. I've got now a pipeline that I can use that produces some data. What I want to do is put that on to the web services engine so that I can see it. To do that, I need to select the interface manager and endpoints. From endpoints, I can then create a web service pipeline. What it does is immediately and magically creates a pipeline web service, or a web service that maps to that pipeline. So again, I can keep the naming consistent here, so it's customer, and call this get customer endpoint, and then set the zone and press save. Now I can set all my parameters up, so I don't want to include log. It doesn't need to be public. The MIME type can be HTML. It runs the pipeline called get customer. Its response is default, could be HTTP or JSON. The data that I'm returning is not everything that's in the context, it's just the last result that I'm interested in. And then basically I can give it a route of get customer. The verb that I want to be able to interact with it from the internet is get. You can use post, put, delete, standard verbs that web browsers understand, and press save. So I've now created an endpoint which is connected and secured to that pipeline to retrieve information. I need only go over and start up my web service engine in order to make it work. So here it's bound to localhost and port 8084. There are no defaults, and we can enable metadata information about it and press apply. I then start up the web service engine and update the services. I see that guest customer is now available to me through the debug here, and away I go. I can potentially use it. So I go over to a new web browser, tab, and then type get customer. It's now presented me with a standard authorization. It's saying that the endpoint get customer requires authorization, so I can log in as administrator. And then a password. The result here is nothing. So if I actually entered some information into the system, I would see some data come back. So I can do that cheaply by simply typing in the first name of Bora, last name of Hu, and just some standard garbage data, and then apply. That's great. I've got a record inside Oracle. If I press return here, I should now see that the web service has produced a result for me. And so essentially if I need that in JSON, I can get it in JSON. If I need that in XML, I can get that in XML. And that's a part of the Universal Platform's advantage here is that it's automating stuff that developers would have created for us. So what I will do here now is delete that record, because I don't want them around. And if I press refresh, it's gone. So returning back to our pipelines, what we now need to do is start bringing some data in. So the technique here is that I need to create a pipeline which is going to pull information from a database or source system, be it Spreadsheet or whatever we've decided to do, and then load that information through the data transform and then into the model, and then from the model to the database as a target. So to achieve this, we use pipelines once again. And then essentially I can just say, well, really I want to import this information from SQL. So I'll just say it's SQL Server to Data Hub. Select the editor. What I need to do is pull information from SQL Server. So I've got SQL Server, get data from query, and I can select SQL Server. I press save here if I want to, and rearrange. Press run, it all just works. What we see returned in the output log is a JSONified version of what I think the data looks like, and I see that I can visually confirm that is the case. I also get log, but I get the context again. What I see is this information coming back from SQL Server as mapped, and I know there's only a few records inside of there. What I then need to do is be able to map that information and be able to utilize my transforms. To do that, we use the interface technology in the map data node. So if I drag the map data node and bring that together, I can see that I can start the formation of something which is going to start transforming the data. So this is the getting of the data. This is mapping of the data. Mapping of the data basically takes a data format. So I need to say, alright, well, that was SQL Server to Data Hub. I know that it's coming from SQL Server. It's been tagged as, and I know it's got to go through and map that information as if it was coming from SQL Server to a specific data hub. The problem here is that inside of our flow programming environment, map data won't work in this current solution because I need to be able to give it some data. In order to move data between nodes, we have a system called binding. Binding simply says, from this output node of this feature called table data from query, I want to be able to bind information to map data. Nodes actually tell us what they can actually bind to. So in the case of get table data from query, it's the result of the query. And where I want to map it to is into the map data itself. And so I can press save, and press run, and I can see that starts to build up. What we get is actually a result now of what it thought that it mapped the data to. And if you can recall, we only mapped email, first name, last name, and that's correct. That's exactly what it's doing. If there are other transforms or anything else tricky required, for example, you might want it too upper, too lower, you might want to change the case, split, trim, any kind of textual change or even lookup, that can be done inside map data, and it gives us information about what's to be done. The next step is that we actually require this information to now go into the database. But there's one additional thing I need to point out. So if I save and close that particular pipeline and return to the data manager, data models, what we would like this to do is to be able to update from all of the different sources, but specifically we want to be able to set a constraint such that it would be an update if the email was the same. So what we're doing is we kind of understand that in our organization, emails are unique to customers. So if we look at the constraints for this, what I've done is pre-created an email external key. Inside data models, it's called an external key. It's not a primary key. It's an external key due to the fact that we're looking outwardly at this model. So we're not deeply related to the primary key of the customer itself. That can remain, because that's how the customer table works. The customer number is primary key in this case. But more specifically, we've got an external key identifying another natural key, which is a part of identifying unique records when simultaneously colliding information together. So email external key, and we want it to be unique, and it targets the email attribute. I could have targeted many attributes to make up that external key and add them on in, but in this case it's just email. So with that in mind, what I can then do is start to save my SQL Data Hub information in. So I can return to the editor, map data, and now I need to be able to go and save that information. So previously on my connector I exposed the save method, and I can now save that information in. So inside of save, I need to say, well, the data model I'm going to, and so that's the Oracle Data Hub model, and then essentially bind. So I can take the output data of a data map and then send that into the save function of the Oracle save data. So from there I can then press run, and essentially what we'll have is the query running against a SQL Server database, us mapping and transforming that information against the database, and then saving that information into the database. You can see that's actually run, and it will produce some data and some results. So with any luck, if I actually go and requery now, I can see that I've brought information in from SQL Server, now mapped directly into Oracle database itself. So let's go ahead and create all of these for each particular system. Next, what I'll do is target the spreadsheet and bring in spreadsheet information layered over the top. So this is Excel to Data Hub. And essentially what I'm doing is reading a spreadsheet. So to do that I need to read spreadsheet, and away I go. The core problem here is that the spreadsheet has nothing to read. It's just simply sitting out there on its own. What I need to now do is actually go to our storage node and bring in the spreadsheet by reading in the spreadsheet from a storage node. To do that, we use getStorageItem. So getStorageItem allows us to target files on a storage system, and it's basically hiding away the implementation of storage systems. So this could have been coming from Dropbox, S3, Glacier, Windows, local drives, NFS. There's a great combination of what it could be. So here we get getStorageItem. We're returning from path. The pattern I want to return is the name of the spreadsheet itself. So I know that there is files, and the spreadsheet's called getMike's contacts. Let's grab that now. It's an XLS. I can paste that in. So what we'll do is make sure that our spreadsheet returns from our storage item. What we'll see is getStorageItem tells us that it's got a count of 1 file, so there's 1 file that have been read from that storage, and it worked. So what I can now do, having got a spreadsheet into my virtual world, is be able to start reading from the spreadsheet itself. So what I need is read spreadsheet, and select that information in, remembering that it does this node and then moves to the next node, and then we can bind that information in. And then essentially bind the files that are coming from getStorage into the files of the read spreadsheet. In read spreadsheet, I've got to know which spreadsheet sheet I need to read from, So in this case it's going to be data. So I just type in data. I say yes, it's got a header row. I know the range is A1 to P6. The start row is 1. There's no fill down on this. And it's got some files. So what I can then do is press save and then press run. And then it's read information out as data. So I can see that it's brought through the company, it's brought through the names, it's brought through addresses. More specifically, I'm interested in the first name and last name. So now I can go off and repeat the process again of mapping. So I select mapping and save. So I can just tell Oracle that you need to save. And away I go. I also have to bind information together, so I can take the output of the spreadsheet data and pass that into the map. So I need the data and data to map data. I then know that this is Excel to Data Hub, and then I need to pass that information once again, once it's mapped, straight into the save. So from the map data I can grab the data, and from the save I can put it into the data. And that's going off to Data Hub. Now I'm expecting to see a little bit more information, so this is Mike's contacts. And what I've got in here is 5 new contacts to move into my Data Hub. So we'll press run. You see that we've got 6 errors. We see that email contains no information. So on our read spreadsheet, we actually map data from email. So Excel to Hub. Email address. And spreadsheet produced. Lowercase email address. So what we're seeing now is the ability to be able to go and change. So email address here is inside of data formats. So with inside Data Manager, I can go inside the models, Excel, model, and just simply change the attribute mail address. So for Excel, it's really mail lowercase address, but we can say it's email space address if we wanted to. We can return to that pipeline and press run, and you'll see that's now been successful. So that's a very dramatic example of how we handle change and dynamicism with inside reading data. I can see that it's mapped the data now properly, and it's bringing through the last names and emails for me. So with any luck, I can see a little bit more information inside of Oracle. So I noticed that first name and last name is now missing. So from here I can see that the email has now been set. I know that the primary key or the external key for our customer is actually set, so it's not actually first name space last name. So with inside read spreadsheet, I now need to know what is actually being read. So I can do that by simply inspecting the results. So I know it's lowercase and lowercase once again. So again I can come back into my spreadsheet data model and then simply just say last name, all case sensitive, and first name. And press save. So I can return to my pipeline and just simply keep on running. And the idea is that we're building up and building up this information. So if I return to here, I should be able to see that the first name and last name has now appeared because we had an external key mapped on email. So that's a really significant feature, and I didn't have to do anything. We can also now return to our web service view, and we can see that we're starting to build up quite an interesting view. So I've now got SQL Server, I've now got a spreadsheet. Save and close. The next is to bring in a CSV. So likewise, do CSV to Data Hub, save, editor. So we fulfill the same method. So we do get storage item, and we can say it's from customer files. We can then select the pattern of files, and then it's contacts CSV. So we just say contacts.csv, and we press run, and we can see that it's returned a count of 1, and the files it's returned is a virtual version of that file. So what I need to do now is read delimited that file. So I can do that by simply selecting and bringing that information straight on in. So I then need to do a map. Data. And then the last thing I do is bring it into Oracle. So data from query, save, bring in my save, and there I go. So I'll just bind everything up. So storage item to read delimited gets files, and it goes into read delimited files. Read delimited gives me data, which then goes into map data's data. Map data gives me data, which then goes into saves data, so that we can configure everything up. So read delimited has a header row, and pretty much going to read the header row. Map data, we need that to be the CSV, because we need the CSV mapping. And then lastly, we need Oracle to be the data hub, and we can press save on Oracle and press run to test it. So we can see that it's brought in some information. We can go look at files. Let's look once more at what that spreadsheet looks like. Yep. There's about 5 different files that we're bringing on in. We'll go and see if it brought that information in again. It did. So there's now SQL Server, Spreadsheet, and CSV. Notice that it's also brought in phone number, so we've actually got an idea that phone number is coming in as well. We can talk about the title grid here. The title we are not seeing just as yet because we haven't asked title to come on in, and the title is not being sourced from anywhere, and we're not tracking. So we can improve our data model over time to be able to cope with that concept. Save and close. Next we'll do access. So we'll do access to Data Hub. It follows a similar path as you would expect. This is a little bit easier because Microsoft Access can just simply run off a query. So we've got Microsoft Access and Microsoft Access query, and then essentially we need to go through the same process. So if we press run here, we'll see that that query is going to produce a result for us into our context of get table data, and away we go. So from here we can then basically bring that information in by going through the same process. So we've got our data, we need only then map it, and then we save it. So here's Oracle, here's save, and once again we go through the same pattern. Lastly here we bind. And there we go. So the table data produces for us get table result, which we bind to the data of the map node. The map node, which is Microsoft Access to Data Hub, produces data, and we save that to the data of the Data Hub. The Data Hub then needs to know that it's going from the map data of Access to Data Hub mapping translation to saving into the Data Hub. So here we have the data being mapped once again. We've fast forwarded and we know the routine. It's going to bring in some data. So here we've got plenty of data, new records coming in. Also note that we've got Michael Wise and Mike Shepherd coming on into our database system itself. And so the list keeps on growing. What we have now is more phone numbers and more emails being updated. But we also note that Mike Shepherd's now got phone number, and I've also brought in the title for these 2 records as well. So this is interesting. Now we find a system out there that is actually supporting the concept of a title. So thank you very much, Access. We move on to the last piece. What we now need to do is be able to bring in MySQL. So MySQL is actually going to be the owner of title, as we know, but it also contains filled-in title information, as discussed. So again, we go through the same process. So here we have MySQL, get table data. We then go through and map that data in, and then we can go and save it off to Oracle. We then go and bind that information in. And away we go again. So we get the table data from MySQL. MySQL then gives that table data to the data of the map node. Map node looks at MySQL's transformation. The transformation produces the data for us and then maps to the data of the save. The save then goes off and saves that to Oracle. So we can press save at this stage and press run. Explained that it's produced new output. So if we go and look at this information once again and press F5 on this, we see that the title has now been updated. We can see that more clearly from this point of view, that the title has now been set. So what happens if we run the access pipeline again? And this is where it gets interesting. So if we go pipelines access to data hub, I don't need to be in it, I can just simply stay outside and press run. So it's executed. And she's done. So if I press refresh here, what we'll see is that this title has now returned to founder and sales guy. Now, we know in our business that MySQL is actually the king of title for a contact. We've produced now a database that's got everything in it from each different system, so I can run each of these pipelines. I can also go into our information bus here and schedule these pipelines as groups, so I can automate the entire thing by just simply pressing execute pipeline, and away I go. I can create a group and run pipelines and do that on a schedule. I can also go through into our event system and use a pub sub to be able to kick off the execution of a pipeline as well, reading information from some other location. But really what I want to do is defend this information about title inside my database. So we have to rely on a living data model to do that. So what we need to do is go and set the conflict rules inside of the data model itself to be able to handle the concept that only MySQL can update. So if we go into the Data Hub model, and we can select Customer, and then essentially we need to tell it the sources which can actually edit these things. So what we've got here is a source attribute and a source sequence of title. What we're trying to do is deposit the title GUID and title information, but what we've got is the Data Hub currently being prime. What we need to say is utilize our single points of truth and say that, well, it's MySQL, and that if you see something from Access, which are the only two places that have that piece of information being updated. And what we want is basically MySQL coming first, Access coming second, and then the hub coming third, whilst dealing with title. If you see that information happen, then deposit the tag of the actual single point of truth into the database while you're at it, is what we're saying. So I can press save on that. And essentially what I can do now is press, where were we? We see that, yeah, we've still got founder and sales guy. So if I go and run MySQL now, run executing, go over and refresh, we see that it's now been updated. Furthermore, we get the actual tag of a GUID against that particular field combination to indicate to us that collision has occurred and that it's now ruling that particular field. So what happens if we then run access? Now we know that last time it pretty much overrode. But since we've got the rules in play with the data model, we should actually see this field stay still. And it does. What we also notice is that the Microsoft Access GUID tag has appeared. So it's starting to tag where it came from inside the world of our database and disparate systems. So we know that these records came from Microsoft Access. We also know that they're empty and contained no information, but also mapped against their key of email. So as you see, and this is a long refresh to understand some of the power that is Universal Platform. It is a server that's running locally on my machine, in the SaaS on the cloud, or in your server organization. So you can run this information internally to your organization, but as an end user be able to conduct what I've exactly done is been able to introduce into an Oracle database collision and data improvements and understanding and pulling data from different disparate data sources very easily.